Hey there, this is Conflict Tales. Buckle up because today's story is packed with drama, conflict, and shocking turns. The sirens were deafening as two patrol cars screeched to a stop in front of my house. Blue and red lights flooded the neighborhood, casting long, flickering shadows over the neatly trimmed lawns and pristine sidewalks. Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, some bold enough to step outside and gawk. I stood on my front porch, hands raised slightly, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Officer Blake, a man with a square jaw and tired eyes, stepped out of his car, adjusting his belt as he marched up my driveway. "Mr. Carter, we got a call about a disturbance. Homeowner Association reported that you were making threats to a board member." His voice was firm, but there was an edge of boredom to it, like he'd done this dance before. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "That's ridiculous. I haven't threatened anyone. What's the charge this time? Unapproved breathing?" Blake's partner, a younger officer who still looked like he had some faith in the system, glanced at his notepad. "The report says you were seen trespassing near homeowner association property and vandalizing a community sign." I barked out a laugh, incredulous. "I was at work all day. Check the security cameras at my office. And homeowner association property? What the hell even counts as that?" From the corner of my eye, I saw her, the queen of the neighborhood, standing with her arms crossed, lips pursed in that smug expression she always wore when she thought she'd won. Karen. Her floral blouse was stiff with starch, her blonde bob perfectly sculpted, her nails immaculate as she pointed in my direction. "Officers, I'm telling you, he's dangerous. He's been harassing the board, making threats about stopping the new parking lot project. I don't feel safe in my own home anymore." I scoffed. "Yeah, Karen, because wanting to breathe clean air is so threatening." Blake sighed, clearly not eager to escalate things. "Mr. Carter, let's not do this here. You're not under arrest, but I need you to come down to the station for some questions." I clenched my jaw, glancing at my 10-year-old son, Lucas, who was peeking out from the living room window, his small hands pressed against the glass. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. The boy had been through enough already. I swallowed hard and nodded. "Fine, but this is harassment and you know it." Karen smiled, sickly sweet. "Oh, Mr. Carter, rules are rules. You should have just followed them." The ride to the station was long, filled with the sound of the radio crackling and my own thoughts racing. They were trying to break me, I realized. Homeowner Association wanted me gone, and they weren't above using law enforcement as their personal enforcers to make it happen. Hours later, after the usual round of pointless questions and a condescending "we're just doing our job" speech from Blake, I was released without charge. I walked out of the station, my phone buzzing with texts from neighbors who'd seen the whole thing. Some were offering support, others were warning me to back down. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because as I stepped into the cool night air, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. I stepped out of the station, the night air cold against my skin, but the heat in my chest burned hotter than ever. I had known moving into this neighborhood would come with some challenges, but I never expected to be at war with the homeowner association. The fact that Karen and her minions had the audacity to use the police against me only solidified what I already knew. This wasn't just about a parking lot. This was about control, about power, about making sure people like me knew our place. Lucas was waiting for me when I got home, curled up on the couch, his inhaler still clutched in his small hand. I sat beside him, running a hand through his messy brown hair. "Dad, are they going to make us move?" His voice was small, uncertain, and it made my gut twist. "No, kiddo. No one's making us go anywhere." I leaned down, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "We're staying right here." The next morning, I found a notice taped to my door. "Violation. Unauthorized display of signage." Beneath it, a fine of $500. I ripped the paper off and crumpled it in my fist. Karen wasn't wasting any time. I stormed over to my laptop, pulling up the Homeowner Association's regulations. Nowhere did it say that posting a petition in your own window was against the rules. My phone buzzed with a message from Liza. They got me, too. Landscaping violations. $200. This is insane. I knew what was happening. This was the homeowner association's way of bleeding us dry, wearing us down until we gave up. But I wasn't backing down. I grabbed my phone and dialed George, the old neighbor who had been dealing with this homeowner association nightmare for longer than anyone. "You ready to fight back?" he asked before I even had a chance to speak. "You have no idea." That night, we gathered in George's backyard, me, Liza, George, and a handful of other neighbors who were fed up with the harassment. "They're trying to push us out," Liza said, her hands clenched into fists. "They hit at least 4 of us with new violations today." George nodded. "That's their playbook. They jack up fines, wear you down, make you think you don't have a choice. Most people just fold." "Not us," I said. "We need a strategy. Legal, public pressure, whatever it takes." George took a slow sip of his beer. "I got something you might be interested in." He stood and walked over to an old metal filing cabinet in his garage, rifling through a stack of manila folders before pulling one out and tossing it on the table. "That, my friends, is the original development plan for this neighborhood." I opened it, flipping through pages of old city documents, maps, handwritten notes. Then I saw it, our neighborhood, and a large section labeled Public Use Land, the same section where they were planning to build the parking lot. This land was never supposed to be sold. It was designated for public parks. The only way homeowner association got their hands on it was through a shady backroom deal about 20 years ago. They didn't own it then, and I'd bet good money they don't own it now. Liza let out a breath. "So, if we can prove that, then their whole project is dead in the water," I finished. "And if they've been collecting homeowner association fees based on illegal land claims..." George smirked. "Then they're in for a world of hurt." We stayed up late strategizing, going over every document, every legal loophole we could find. By the time I got home, exhaustion weighed on my shoulders, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about my fight anymore, and this was about stopping something that had been going on for decades. The next morning, I woke up to another violation notice. Obstruction of community harmony. I laughed. They were getting desperate. Then the knock on my door came. Hard. Persistent. When I opened it, Officer Blake stood there again, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter, we need to talk." Karen's voice carried from behind him. "See, officers, he's a menace." I clenched my jaw as I stepped outside. This time, I wasn't just going to sit back and take it. Blake folded his arms and looked at me for a long moment before sighing. "Look, Mr. Carter, I don't like being used as homeowner association's personal attack dog, but I have to follow up on reports. Karen's claiming you're inciting rebellion, disrupting community operations. Inciting rebellion? By questioning fines and asking for legal documentation?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Tell me, officer, do you really believe this?" Blake glanced over his shoulder where Karen stood, pretending to be afraid, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Between you and me, no. But she's got influence. The department has been getting calls about you non-stop. Someone high up wants you quiet." "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. "And if homeowner association thinks they can bully me into leaving, they've got another thing coming." Blake exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Just keep your head down, Carter. If this escalates, it won't end well for anyone." I watched him leave, feeling the pressure mounting. It was clear now. Homeowner association wasn't just harassing me. They were trying to erase me. I had no choice but to push back harder. If they wanted a fight, I was ready to give them one. The moment Officer Blake walked away, I knew things were only going to get worse. Homeowner association wasn't just trying to find me into submission anymore. They were escalating, using the police, manipulating the legal system, and ensuring I was isolated. But if they thought I was going to back down, they didn't know me at all. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing Lucas's frightened face at the window, the flash of police lights reflecting in his eyes. I needed to protect him. I needed to stop this before it spiraled completely out of control. By morning, I had made my decision. I was going on the offensive. I started with research. I combed through every local government database I could access, cross-referencing property records, zoning laws, and old legal disputes. It was tedious, but by noon I found something interesting. The Land Homeowner Association claimed for the parking lot wasn't fully transferred to them. The legal documentation was murky, a lot of back and forth over the years, but no clear ownership. They were bluffing. If I could prove it, I could throw a wrench into their entire scheme. But I needed more. I needed hard evidence, something undeniable. So I called George. "Meet me at the town records office. We need to see the original deed." He grumbled about being too old for this, but I could hear the eagerness in his voice. When we arrived, the clerk barely looked up as I requested the files. Bureaucracy was slow, but persistence was faster. After 30 minutes of waiting, I had the documents in my hands, and there it was, a discrepancy in the transfer records. The deed still listed the land as part of the public trust, with no official change of hands. George let out a low whistle. "Well, well, well. Looks like homeowner association's been playing dirty longer than we thought." I took pictures of everything, making digital backups just in case. "This isn't just a legal problem. It's fraud. They're charging homeowners for land they don't even own." George nodded. "They'll fight this, and they'll fight dirty." And fight they did. By the time I got home, another notice was waiting. Noise violation, repeated disruptions to community peace. Another fine. They weren't just trying to silence me. They were burying me under bureaucratic nonsense. And then came the real problem. Liza called, her voice shaking. "They shut off my water. No warning, no reason, just off. I called the city. Homeowner association told them it was for community repairs." My grip on the phone tightened. "That's illegal. They can't just—" "They did, and I'm not the only one. George's power went out this morning, too." My blood boiled. This wasn't just intimidation anymore, this was war. I spent the next few hours making calls, gathering every affected neighbor I could. We met at my place. Liza, George, a few others who had enough of homeowner association's tactics. "They're cutting off utilities now. What's next? Evictions." Liza's voice trembled with anger. "We fight back," I said. "Legally, publicly. We take this beyond just our neighborhood. We make noise they can't ignore." George nodded. "I know, a reporter. Local guy, not afraid to ruffle feathers. If we get this to him, we might get some real attention." It was risky, but at this point, playing safe wasn't an option. "Do it. Set up the meeting." That night, as I sat on my porch, another patrol car rolled by, slowing just enough to remind me that I was being watched. I exhaled, feeling the weight of the battle ahead. They thought they could scare me. They thought they could push me out. But they were wrong. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up to another fine, this time for failure to maintain property aesthetics. The homeowner association wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. They were throwing everything they could at me, hoping I would break. But instead of fear, all I felt was determination. I met with the reporter that afternoon, handing over every document we had gathered. "This is corruption," I said, "and it goes deep. If they've done this here, they've done it elsewhere." The journalist, a hard-nosed guy named Ryan, flipped through the evidence. "If this checks out, homeowner association is in serious trouble. This could be huge." That night, I saw Karen standing across the street watching my house. She was on the phone, her expression dark. The moment she saw me, she turned away quickly and got into her car. I could feel the storm coming, but I wasn't backing down. The next day, the Homeowner Association Board held an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, of course, but George managed to slip in unnoticed and record the whole thing. Later that night, I listened to the audio. Karen's voice was sharp. "We need to shut him down before this spreads. If the press gets hold of this, we could be in legal trouble. I want options. Find out if he's violated anything at all." The silence that followed was telling. They were scared, and that meant I had power. It was time to use it. The moment I listened to the recording George had captured, I felt the shift. This was no longer just a fight over a parking lot or homeowner association fines. This was a full-scale battle against corruption, and the enemy was beginning to panic. I sat at my kitchen table, the dim light flickering above me, replaying Karen's voice over and over. "We need to shut him down before this spreads. If the press gets hold of this, we could be in legal trouble. I want options. Find out if he's violated anything at all." The desperation in her tone was unmistakable. The next morning, before the sun had even fully risen, I started making calls. Ryan, the reporter, was my first stop. "I've got a recording," I said. "It's exactly what we were looking for." His voice sharpened with interest. "Send it over. I'll verify it, but if this is legit, we're going to make a lot of noise." By noon, Ryan had called me back. "This is big. They're outright conspiring to cover up their illegal activity. I'm reaching out to legal experts, but I think we can publish something by the end of the week." I hung up and exhaled slowly. We were in motion now. No turning back. That afternoon, Liza showed up at my doorstep with a look of pure fury. They shut down the water again. This time, not just for me. Half the street is out. My fists clenched at my sides. "They think they can break us. They're wrong." George joined us not long after, bringing new information. "I did some digging. This isn't the first time homeowner association has done something like this. 3 years ago, in another neighborhood they managed, the same pattern. Fines, property threats, utilities shut off. The difference? Nobody fought back. They all moved out, and guess what happened to their homes? Sold at a massive profit to developers." Lisa's eyes widened. "They're running people out on purpose." I nodded. "And we're next, unless we stop them." As the sun dipped lower, we mapped out our next steps. Ryan's article would expose the homeowner association's corruption, but we needed more. "We have to be ready for retaliation," I said, "because after this article drops, they're coming for us harder than ever." That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house felt like an omen. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Walk away before it's too late." I gritted my teeth. They were getting desperate. The next morning, my mailbox was stuffed with yet another violation notice. "Failure to comply with community standards." No explanation, just a $500 fine. Liza texted me minutes later. "They're fining everyone who attended our last meeting. Every single one of us." George was next. "I saw Karen talking to a lawyer this morning. They're planning something." By noon, I got a knock at my door. Officer Blake again. He looked at me with something that almost resembled pity. "We got a formal complaint filed against you. Harassment, disturbing the peace, threats against homeowner association members." I barked out a laugh. "Let me guess. Karen?" He nodded. "You're officially on notice. One more complaint, and they can push for a restraining order, which means you wouldn't be able to attend any homeowner association meetings, talk to neighbors, or challenge them legally." My stomach twisted. This was their plan. If they could silence me, they could win. Blake sighed. "Look, off the record, you need to be smart about this. They want you to snap. Don't give them what they want." I closed the door, anger burning through me. I wasn't going to snap. I was going to win. That night, Ryan called me. "The article is live, and you're going to want to see the reaction." I clicked the link he sent and felt my pulse race. The headline, "Homeowner Association Caught in Corruption Scandal. Residents Fight Back." The floodgates had opened. Comments poured in. People from across the country sharing their own homeowner association horror stories. Calls for an investigation. And then, the best part, an email from a state attorney's office. "We'd like to discuss your allegations. Please contact us at your earliest convenience." Lisa called me minutes later. We did it. We actually did it. I exhaled sharply, the weight of months of battle lifting just slightly. But I knew better than to celebrate too soon. Because Karen wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, I woke to the sound of tires screeching outside my house. I rushed to the window in time to see a black SUV pulling away. On my lawn, scattered like confetti, were printed copies of Ryan's article, with the words "lies" and "propaganda" scrawled across them in red ink. Before I could even process what had just happened, my phone rang. George's voice was tight. "They just called an emergency homeowner association meeting. It's happening tonight. No notice, no warning. You need to be there." I felt my pulse quicken. This is their next move. They're going to try to discredit us publicly. Liza texted. "They're putting up flyers around the neighborhood. Homeowner association accusing us of anti-community behavior. We need to be ready." As the sun set, I prepared for what was coming. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was war. I knew the emergency homeowner association meeting wasn't just another routine gathering. This was a declaration of war. Karen and her people had been caught, exposed, humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood, and now they were scrambling to regain control. As I walked toward the community center that evening, I saw the signs plastered across the neighborhood. Homeowner Association under attack. Protect our community. And outsiders stirring trouble. Join us to stop them. They were trying to paint us as villains. Outsiders who didn't belong. Agitators destroying the peace. The meeting room was packed. More people than I'd ever seen at an homeowner association meeting before. Karen sat at the front, her lips pressed into a tight line. Her usual confidence was replaced with something else. Anger, desperation, fear. She stood as soon as I walked in, her voice amplified by the microphone. "There he is! The man trying to ruin our neighborhood!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. I folded my arms, refusing to be intimidated. The only people ruining this neighborhood are the ones stealing from it. A murmur spread through the audience. Some of them had read the article, seen the evidence. Others still clung to their loyalty to Karen and the homeowner association. Karen slammed a stack of papers onto the table. "We've received multiple complaints against you, Mr. Carter. Disturbing the peace, harassment, failure to comply with homeowner association regulations." I smirked. "Funny how none of those complaints existed before I started asking questions about your finances." A woman in the crowd stood up. "Is it true what the article says? That homeowner association doesn't legally own the land?" Karen's face darkened. "That's nonsense. Lies spread by people who don't care about this community." George rose from his seat, holding up a document. "Actually, it's not lies. We pulled the original deed records. Homeowner association has no legal claim to the land. And if they've been collecting fees on it, that's fraud." The room erupted, people shouting over one another, questions, accusations. Karen's face twisted with rage. "You don't understand how these things work. Legal technicalities don't let you steal from your neighbors," Liza cut in. "We trusted you, and you used that trust to line your pockets." More voices joined in. More questions Karen couldn't answer. More people demanding transparency, demanding a vote. Then the doors burst open. 2 men in suits stepped inside, flashing their credentials. "State Attorney's Office, we have questions regarding homeowner association financial activities. We'd like to speak with Mrs. Langley." Karen paled. For the first time, she had nothing to say. The crowd went silent, then whispers, then outright murmurs. I watched as she squared her shoulders, gripping the table in front of her. "This is absurd. You can't just barge in here." One of the men held up a folder. "We have enough evidence to open an investigation. The best thing you can do right now is cooperate." Karen looked around the room, searching for allies, but even her closest supporters had gone quiet. George leaned over and whispered, "Looks like the Queen just lost her crown." I exhaled slowly. It was over. After months of fines, threats, police calls, and sleepless nights, it was finally over. I turned to the neighbors, my neighbors, the ones who had stood beside me through this. "We're calling for a vote to dissolve the homeowner association. Who's with us?" Hands shot up, one by one, dozens of them, a landslide decision. Karen's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. But no words came. She knew she had lost. A week later, the homeowner association was officially dissolved. The land deal was dead. Karen resigned in disgrace, and those who had backed her slithered away quietly. As I stood on my front porch, watching Lucas play in the yard, I realized something. We had won. Not just against Karen, not just against the homeowner association. We had won our home back, and we weren't giving it up ever again. The aftermath was almost surreal. Calls from news outlets started flooding in, reporters eager to cover the downfall of the homeowner association and Karen's corruption. Ryan's article had gone viral, inspiring homeowners from across the country to come forward with their own homeowner association horror stories. The state attorney's office expanded their investigation, uncovering years of financial mismanagement and embezzlement. Karen wasn't just disgraced, she was facing criminal charges. One evening, George and I sat on my porch watching the sunset. "You know," he said, sipping his beer, "this whole mess could have gone the other way. If we hadn't pushed back, they would have buried us." I nodded. But they didn't. And now, people know they can fight back. Liza joined us, handing me a letter. "This came in today. It's from the state attorney's office. They want us to testify." I took the letter, reading the official wording. Karen and several homeowner association board members were officially being charged with fraud, extortion, and misuse of community funds. It was the final nail in the coffin. Lucas ran up, breathless from playing. "Dad, does this mean we don't have to deal with homeowner association ever again?" I ruffled his hair. "Not just us, kiddo. A lot of people." A few days later, Karen was arrested. The same police officers she had weaponized against us now led her out of her home in handcuffs, the cameras rolling. The neighborhood watched in silence, some shocked, some satisfied. Justice had finally come. Weeks turned into months, and the neighborhood changed. Without the homeowner association, people began making decisions for themselves. There were no more ridiculous fines, no more harassment, no more abuse of power. We became a real community, one where people actually looked out for each other instead of living in fear of citations and penalties. I took one last look at my home, at the place we had fought so hard to protect. It wasn't just about property anymore. It was about standing up when no one else would, about refusing to be bullied, about proving that even against corruption, justice could still win. And as the sun set over the quiet, peaceful streets, I knew one thing for certain. We had taken our lives back, and no one was ever going to take them away again.